Hi, my name is Steve Schwetz and I'm the managing broker for Mesa Properties, and this video is talking about the importance of having a good, well-written lease. And it's so important, and there's so many details that you need to put into a lease that I actually have to use notes to remember everything. And I'm not even going to be able to cover in this video all the stuff you got to know, but it is fairly significant. So first of all, have a lease. You'd be surprised the number of owners that put people into properties, and maybe they were fixing the property up and there was a truck outside and somebody pulled by, and we actually have this happening more than once, and somebody wants the property, they're excited about it, the owner gets a connection with that particular potential tenant, they end up renting into it, and it becomes a nightmare, and then they usually come to us when we have to move through the eviction process. And there's sometimes not a lease. If you do have a lease, some of the important factors on it that need to be spelled out is make sure that there are late fees in there. They need to be reasonable. And we can get into a discussion with you about what a reasonable late fee is, but you cannot charge a $100 late fee on a $1,000 a month property, let's say, and then $60 a day every day that it's late. If that were to go to court, a judge would throw that out. So typically it has to be somewhere in the 5 to 7% range of collected rent, and then a daily late fee generally is not accepted. You may be able to get somebody to pay it. Typically they're not, and then when you go to court you end up losing on that point, and it doesn't bode well for the rest of your case either. So we recommend not doing that. Second thing is a grace period. You know, if rent is due on the 1st, the way Mesa handles it, if rent's due on the 1st, it's late on the 2nd. And then people say, well, what about a grace period? Well, your grace period is the 30 days from the last time the rent was due. And if you want to get paid 5 days late into the month, just give your tenants a 5-day grace period and you'll get paid on the 5th. So that's why we have a 1-day grace period or a 0 grace period. Rent is due the 1st, it's late the 2nd. And for us, if you're not giving us a very good reason why it's late and when it's going to be paid, we call that a promise to pay, you can pretty much expect that you're going to get a 3-day notice within the next day saying that you need to pay rent or quit. I digress a little bit. Let me go back into some of the main contents of the lease that a lot of people don't realize. One thing you need to make sure and make clear, both in the lease and in the move-in process, is that the security deposit is not to be used for the last month's rent. Very important, because you're going to need to have money to fix that property typically, and you want to be able to send the tenant money back when they leave, not asking them for money, because guess what? Oftentimes you don't get that money from the tenant once they leave the house. You need to clarify and make sure that they understand there's no smoking on the property. Reality is a lot of people do smoke in the porch, garage, backyard, but you want to make sure that your property is no smoking. You need to outline any maintenance expectations. So if they're supposed to keep the trees green or the grass cut, or everything in working order, you need to have a warning about mold, and that they need to be vigilant about letting you know of any leaks that are happening. You need to let them know that there's no subletting. If you have, this is a very common thing, if you have a condominium, you know that you have CC&Rs, conditions, covenants, and restrictions, and then HOA rules and regulations. You need to make sure that your tenant with your lease gets the rules and regulations. They need to know from what based on where they're living, that they can't park 4 cars in the complex, as an example, or they can't even park on the street in some tighter HOAs. That information needs to be given to them. Otherwise, they could sign the lease, not be given the HOA restrictions. You come in a month later and they read them and say, I don't want to move here. I can't park all my vehicles. They can legally break the lease without owing you anything because you didn't disclose it. Another way that somebody can break a lease is if your property was built before 1978. You have something potentially in your property called lead. Lead is not a good thing. So if you have a property that's pre-78 build, you have to give them a document that says protecting their family from lead. It's a big California government document. And then you have to disclose to them in the lease whether or not you know of any known lead paint areas in the home. Typically nobody knows that, but you still have to go through the disclosure. And again, if you don't do the disclosure, they can break the lease if you didn't give them a lead-based paint disclosure. The other thing that I recommend, and I won't go through any more of these, but the last thing is you need to put a mediation clause in there. Nobody likes to be sued. And whenever you get sued, you end up having to lawyer up and spend a bunch of money back and forth with a tenant. So you want to have some type of a mediation clause in there so that you can go to mediation if a tenant does end up suing you. And then the final thing that I'll put on there is you need to make sure that it says that there are no oral agreements or any agreements that exist outside of the lease. Again, it's just a clarification, but it's good language to have in any legal contract. If you don't want to mess with this very complex piece of renting your property, establishing and getting a good lease and putting a good tenant in, and handling the day-to-day maintenance issues that come up and the tenant relations, give us a call anytime. Go to our website, mesaproperties.net. We'd love to talk to you. Thanks.